The head track and field coach at Lake Oswego High School says he lost his job because he wrote letters to state officials calling its policy on transgender athletes flawed. On Wednesday, Coach Parks says the district terminated his contract because of those letters.
Hey everybody, I'm Brad Polumbo, and welcome back to the Damage Control podcast, where we are reclaiming the debate over LGBT issues from the crazy people who've taken it over. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a disturbing case where a track coach was fired simply for speaking out in favor of common sense. And as always, I'll leave some brain cells for your entertainment and watch insane LGBT TikToks. Make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, do take a second to rate and review the show. It really helps. If you're watching with us on YouTube, do hit that like button. And without further ado, let's get into it. So our main topic today is about a high school track coach in Oregon who was recently fired simply for speaking out in favor of common sense, sex-segregated school athletics. Here's some coverage from local news outlet KATU News.
We're following a developing story out of Lake Oswego. The head track and field coach at Lake Oswego High School says he lost his job because he wrote letters to state officials calling its policy on transgender athletes flawed. Coach John Parks says he wrote those letters challenging the law that protects high school athletes who want to compete against the gender that aligns with their gender identity. On Wednesday, Coach Parks says the district terminated his contract because of those letters. K2's Barry Mangold was at tonight's school board meeting at Lake Oswego, where parents and athletes showed up for the coach. Barry?
Yeah, Deb, Coach John Parks says that he is a strong supporter of transgender athletes and says the current policy and state law and the Oregon Student Activities Association sets those athletes up for controversy.
I'm going to fight now because I got wronged. I went in this thing and I was fighting for girls. I'm fighting for female sports, and I'm fighting that it be fair for everybody.
At the state track and field championships last month, John Parks says he witnessed the crowd boo a transgender athlete after they won a girls' event. At the time, Parks was the coach at Lake Oswego High School and had written letters to the OSAA and a state senator advocating for something else.
Are you hoping to have transgender athletes excluded in any way from high school athletic competition?
No, I want it transformed. Sorry to use the pun there, but I want it transformed into a situation where they have a separate division, may it be, we call it open, or allow them to compete as junior varsity athletes. But when you come to championship events, these things involve scholarships, they involve things that they have an unfair advantage in at the highest level when it comes to physical things. We're not talking about political. This is not a political issue to me. It never has been.
Those letters, he says, led to his termination. On Wednesday, Parks says the district ended his contract because of what he wrote, despite the fact that he says administrators knew what he was doing before he sent those letters.
I'm being prevented from speaking by writing a letter and not getting any guidance on this ahead of time. And being told that the letter was okay, it just makes no sense.
The district declining to comment on his termination, saying they do not discuss personnel matters. The athletic director also did not respond to a message on Monday. A group of roughly a dozen parents and athletes showed up to Monday's board meeting to show support for Coach Parks.
I think that John wants the best for everybody, wants the best for the transgender female athletes and also the best for the rest of the female athletes. And I don't think this was anything to do against transgender people. This was to protect both parties involved.
It's about making sure we have fair and safe opportunities for all of our athletes to compete, and that's all that he's asked for.
And right now, Coach Parks says that he is in the process of appealing the termination of his contract. We'll be sure to follow it and keep you posted. At the live desk, Barry Mangold, K2 News.
Barry, thank you.
So the coach is now suing the school district and trying to have this wrong righted, and he's being represented by my friends over at the Liberty Justice Center, which, full disclosure, is representing me in an unrelated case. For more information about the lawsuit, we'll go to their press release. The Liberty Justice Center has filed a First Amendment lawsuit against an Oregon school district on behalf of a high school track and field coach who was fired for proposing an open division for transgender athletes to compete in to ensure fairness for all student athletes. Oregon track and field coach John Parks has trained athletes at the high school, collegiate, and Olympic levels for over 4 decades. This June, however, the Lake Oswego School District and the Lake Oswego School Board fired him from his position as head track and field coach for writing a letter in which he proposed an open division for transgender athletes in the upcoming track and field state championship. So this detail is particularly wild to me because all he actually did to get in trouble was not treat a trans student unfairly or unkindly or discriminate, but simply advocate for a potential solution to a hot button issue to his state government. And the position he's advocating isn't a crazy or fringe view in athletics. It's actually held by many international bodies. Back to the press release, in Oregon, the governing body that regulates high school athletics currently allows student athletes to compete in the division of their asserted gender identity, but its policies conflict with international rules of competition. In March 2023, the World Athletics Council ruled that transgender athletes who have gone through male puberty may not participate in women's international events. As a result, transgender student athletes in Oregon who race in girls' division can no longer advance to international competitions, nor can any biological females they outrace. In August 2023, World Aquatics, the governing body for international swimming events, created an open division in which all sex and gender identities are free to compete. So all the coach did was advocate that their district and their area take a similar approach to that of many international athletic bodies. But that's now a fireable offense? In May 2024, Coach Parks wrote a letter to the Oregon School Activities Association suggesting that Oregon adopt a similar open division, bringing Oregon into alignment with international rules of competition. He proposed that an open division would protect female athletes' opportunities for success by allowing them the chance to advance to international competitions without having to compete against individuals with innate biological and physical advantages over them. Now, because he wrote this letter, apparently local officials tried to accuse him of harassment. In response to his letter, an OSAA official contacted the Lake Oswego School District on May 23rd and falsely accused Coach Parks of discriminating against and harassing transgender athletes at recent track meets. The district fired Coach Parks on June 12, claiming it was because he had violated the district's harassment policy. The district denied his request for an appeal and ignored his rejection of the OSAA official's false accusations. So obviously, if he actually did harass or discriminate against anyone, that would be a totally different case than simply if he was retaliated against for free speech, which is sure what it looks like. But ultimately, that will come out in the wash, hopefully, as part of this lawsuit. On July 24, the Liberty Justice Center filed a lawsuit against the Lake Oswego School District and the Lake Oswego School Board on Coach Parks' behalf, arguing that the district and board fired him in retaliation for writing the letter and thereby violated his constitutional rights to free speech and due process. The lawsuit urges the court to restore his coaching position and to uphold his First and 14th Amendment rights. Now, what makes this case particularly unique and interesting to me is that I always defend the rights of people who get fired or punished for their speech, even if that speech is anti-LGBT, even if it's genuinely homophobic or transphobic, because I believe in free speech, and that includes speech that some people find hateful. But what makes this case even more disturbing than some of those other cases is that this coach really doesn't seem like a hateful or transphobic individual in any way, shape, or form. When I was reading his comments and listening to his interviews, it really does seem like he is completely open to working with and promoting and championing transgender athletes. He just wants fairness and to protect opportunities for female students. That's even clear from the comments that he made in the lawsuit. "I'm a staunch defender of transgender rights," he said. "For decades, I've been a voice for equitable and inclusive treatment for students with a wide variety of gender and sexual identities on the track and in the classroom. And I've seen that these athletic controversies are drawing negative attention to the trans community. Trans athletes have a right to compete, but their bodies have major physical advantages over other students. Oregon's current policies subject these students to so much politicization, and that's a failure by the administration. We have to find a better way to allow all student athletes to compete. For that to happen, we need these matters discussed, not silenced." And that's a really interesting point there, that he's arguing that even this current system isn't what's in the best interests of transgender athletes. Because it is unfair, it puts them under the spotlight. It leads to backlash against the trans community. It leads to them getting booed at track meets and other things that's really unfortunate and unpleasant even for them. So it's really disheartening to see somebody allegedly targeted and fired for simply expressing not so hateful whatsoever views, just advocating a common sense, common belief for fairness and equality, that's held by most of the public and in line with a lot of international athletic bodies. This is very much a First Amendment issue as well, not just a issue of criticism, right? It is a legal issue because this is a public school district and they do have to respect their employees' First Amendment rights. So I hope they're successful in their lawsuit and that the courts hand down a judgment that you cannot fire coaches simply for expressing concern for fairness in the competitions they're responsible for overseeing. And I've got to say, to the officials who think they're helping trans students by targeting and punishing people who speak out like this, you're not. You are only making the backlash worse. You are only fueling the politicization of these issues. I mean, even if you weren't going to listen to them, even if you weren't going to change, you weren't going to have an open division, I think that makes a lot of sense, but maybe you don't, maybe they weren't going to do it. Don't just punish somebody for honestly saying their opinion, for trying to contribute to the discourse. At least, at bare minimum, you should have an open discourse about these things. And trying to silence and browbeat people into submission is only going to engender more backlash and more resistance. Other than that, though, you're all just doing amazing. All right, guys, it's time for everybody's favorite part of the podcast where I react to mind-numbing LGBT TikToks and lose brain cells for your enjoyment. Up first, one of my least favorite gay TikTokers who is just incredibly condescending has something to say that touches on the issue we discussed last week on the podcast about schools being prohibited from having policies that require them to inform parents if a child starts transitioning.
Isn't it weird how all the parents who want to require schools to tell them if their kid is transitioning also seem to be the parents who would react the worst if their kid were to come out to them? Almost as if the parents who are loving and supportive of their kids don't need to worry about the schools telling them because their kids already told them.
This is so frustrating. This just isn't true. Lots of parents are very understandably concerned and alarmed about the idea of schools keeping secrets from them about their child's health and well-being. And it's not just parents who would abuse their kids if they found out they were identifying as trans or anything like that. It's a lot of people who would probably be accepting of that eventually, or at least not mistreat them because of it, but just don't want the government coming between them and their children. To try to discredit their concerns or act like that makes them bad parents is absolutely wild to me. It is not your place or the place of people like you or LGBT activists to get between parents and their kids, especially when it comes to something like their child potentially experiencing gender dysphoria, which, as you well know, if you follow these issues at all or listen to this podcast, often corresponds with increased risk of severe depression, severe anxiety issues, and even increased suicidality. So yeah, a parent should absolutely be informed if their child is experiencing that. And it's wild to me that anybody would argue that shouldn't be the default state of affairs. Up next, this self-described queer TikToker says they're just advocating for equal rights, guys.
Us queer people don't think that we deserve more than other people. We just think that we should have the same rights that straight and cisgendered people do. That we should all have the right to express our gender and sexuality in whatever way that we choose. I mean, I'm not just wearing this shirt because I'm a plant lady. If you disagree that we should have equal rights, then yes, you are, in fact, the problem. I hope that helps.
Why are these TikToks always in the most condescending tone imaginable? Like they're talking down to us like we're stupid or we're children or something. It's really frustrating to listen to, man. Anyway, though, in terms of the actual substance of this video where she's saying, oh no, we just want equal rights, I feel like maybe if you flashed back to like 2010, 2012, something like that, that would have been mostly true. Back then, the LGBT community was advocating for things like marriage equality. That's an issue of equal rights, people having the same rights. Non-discrimination protections. That's an issue of equal rights, being protected like other groups are. But now the things that many of them are advocating for aren't really equal rights. Oftentimes they go above and beyond the rights that other people have. I mean, look at the sports issue. They're arguing that trans women who are biologically male have a right to compete in a sport opposite sex of their own. Nobody else has that right. That's not an equal right. That's an extra special right. They're arguing that they have the right to bully and intimidate, and in some cases even legally require other people to use their pronouns. Nobody else has the right to control other people's speech. That's an extra special additional right. You just go down the line here, and it really just doesn't seem accurate anymore. This idea that we just want equal rights. I mean, that's true for people like me, but I don't really think that's true for the modern queer activist at all at this point. Up next, one woman, Mary Trump, I believe, who might be related to Donald Trump, actually, but is apparently a hardcore lefty, took to TikTok to discuss gay Republicans. And you can guess how that went.
Grindr, a dating site used predominantly by gay and bisexual men, actually crashed during the Republican convention. According to one of Grindr's executives, the RNC is Grindr's quote-unquote Super Bowl. The idea that so many of these Republicans are hooking up with random guys that they actually crashed the site would be funny if it weren't for the fact that they belong to a party that is the enemy of the LGBTQ plus community. There's no doubt they have every intention of going after marriage equality, but if these fascists get into power, no longer having the right to marry will be the least of our problems.
So I found this video interesting, but also annoying because liberals and progressives are the first to bemoan fake news, and they often present it as if it's some kind of mega phenomenon, but it's very much a bipartisan affliction. Grindr executives have never described the RNC as the Super Bowl for Grindr. Never. That is a fake thing that originated from a satire account. And it's also not true that the app crashed, although there probably was a spike in traffic. And I can personally tell you there are a lot of DL gay Republicans in GOP circles and a lot of open gay Republicans at this point. Is it kind of funny? Is it sometimes odd or a little uncomfortable? Are there factions of the GOP that are still pretty anti-gay? Yes to all of those things. But it's still not okay to just push out fake stories to millions of people. And especially when you're doing so in a way that's also detached from factual reality in other ways. It's just not true that the GOP is coming after gay marriage. The most prominent Republican in the country, Donald Trump, love him or hate him, is pro-gay marriage. He's supported it since 2016. He even just had the anti-gay marriage plank removed from the Republican Party platform. And gay marriage is both enshrined in Supreme Court precedent, which is very unlikely to change, but even if it were, it's also now enshrined in federal law that would go into effect were Obergefell v. Hodges overturned. Gay marriage is not going anywhere. This is just scaremongering, fear-mongering, alarmism. It's deeply dishonest, and it, if anything, progressives should be celebrating the fact that on gay marriage, they won. Most people agree with it now. It's not a big issue. But instead, they're falsely demonizing Republicans over it and spreading fear that's not really rooted in reality. Up next, this TikTok couple is basically just straight, but with extra steps.
What the absolute f*** is up? It's Jack Squared, your favorite autistic and trans couple. Speaking of being trans, a bunch of y'all were like, well, hang on, if one of you was assigned female at birth and one of you was assigned male at birth, wouldn't that mean you're in a straight relationship? First of all, thank you for the trans validation. You're well on your way to actually respecting trans people. Put simply, being trans means you are transitioning away from what you were assigned at birth. Regardless of your designation and how far along you are in your transition, you are still trans. It is an umbrella term. Oh, everybody look, it's the trans umbrella. Over here, underneath the non-binary umbrella, which is underneath the trans umbrella, is where you'll find us, and probably a bunch of you too. The non-binary umbrella includes things like gender non-conforming, or agender, or two-spirit. So many people think transgender or the transgender umbrella just stops at trans woman and trans man. It is an encompassing term. This encompassing or umbrella term will include all of these other guys, which are just as valid as identifying as transgender as a trans man or trans woman. It is ableist and classist to expect trans people to present the way you think that they should. So many people don't have access to basic health care, let alone gender-affirming care. So no matter where you are or where we are on the spectrum, if you or we identify as trans, it's valid.
Y'all, this is literally just straight with extra steps. We've got a male and a female, both who present completely as male and completely as female, in a relationship, talking about queer, LGBT, this, that. No, babe. My culture is not your prom dress. You're just straight, and that's okay. I guess in a way, it's a sign of progress that we now have woke white people constantly trying to cosplay as queer when they're actually just boring straight people. But in another sense, it is really frustrating because you don't actually understand our experiences. You're not like us, and you're making the LGBT community look like a joke, especially with this whole idea that a non-binary is under the trans umbrella and that all these other things are against it. No, babe, no, that's fake. That's not real. That's not coherent. That's not legitimate. So if you're saying that's just as legitimate as trans, you're saying that trans and the experience of people with gender dysphoria is not legitimate, which I actually don't agree with. I think it is legitimate. But just lumping in all this unrelated, incoherent nonsense under this trans umbrella is not going to work out well. It's not going to, when you tell people no matter how much anyone transitions or makes any effort at all, they're totally valid. No, they're not. Not everyone's valid. Just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean that that's the truth or the reality. And when you try to put everyone on equal playing field, you actually undermine the people with legitimate experiences and identities. Gatekeeping as a concept exists for a reason. And straight people who want to cosplay as queer couples desperately need to be gate-kept out of the LGBT community. All right, everybody, I can't really take any more LGBT TikToks in one sitting without incurring permanent brain damage. Thanks for tuning in, and do hit that like button if you're watching with us on YouTube. Comment with your thoughts. I do read the comments, so take a second and let me know what you thought about today's main story and all those TikToks we reacted to. And with that, we'll talk again next week.